We're on page 178. And Rabbeinu Avraham ben Rambam, the son of the Rambam, is telling us about the importance of anava, of humility, and also the exceptions to when you have to be humble. Meaning, you don't always have to be humble. There's a time and a place for everything. And some of the exceptions he mentioned last week, today he's going to zoom in on a specific kind of personality who sometimes is not even allowed to be humble. We've done this before, part of this, which is why it might be familiar to you, but we only did a part of it. Thank you so much. And let's read. If someone is involved in leadership, leading other people, there are two kinds of leaders. Not all leaders are the same, there's two different categories. The first one, שואף ומוכשר לאותו הדרך שהולך בו, כגון שמנהיג הוא אנשים שואפי חסידות בדרכי החסידות. Perhaps one leads a community who's seeking piety. You can imagine here, this may be, in your mind, you might think of a Rebbe with his Hasidim. There's not a city, he's not a mayor, he's not a president, he's not even the rabbi of a community. He's the rabbi of a select group of individuals who have chosen to cling together on a very high spiritual path. Or it could be that he's a leader who has a large community of different kinds of people inside his community. כגון מלך ישראל, או ראש גלות, או ראש ישיבה, או שופטי ישראל ושוטריהם, like a king of Israel, or the Rosh Galut. Have you heard of this man, the Rosh Galut, Rosh Galuta? The exilarch, they call him in English. It doesn't help you at all when they say it in English. The Rosh Galuta, in Judaism we had a government that lasted for many years. After the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, we had a Nasi, in the times of Talmud, a prince, Rabbi Yonatan Nasi. He wasn't just called the prince. He was actually the prince of the Jewish people. He functioned like a prince. He led the Jewish people. He was essentially the recognized leader of the Jewish people under the Roman government. Which means he had power over the Jewish community, but it was limited in terms of whatever the Romans let him do and didn't do. After the Nasi, that Nasiut went away, that prince office went away, we then had a Resh Galuta, the head of the Galut. The Jews who went into exile with a leader who had a government, who had laws, who had courts. This Resh Galut essentially ended in Egypt. The Rambam and his son were the exilarchs of the Jewish community. They held authority, they held office. It was a government office. Not government in terms of the Egyptians, in terms of the Jews.
The Rambam was the last Israelite?
Not necessarily. I'm not as clear as I should be about the history of the Resh Galuta, but if you Google it, you can come to... You'll see when it ended. There were two Nasiim that fought with each other, of course. And at the downfall, I have a class in the Kuzari, the early years of the Kuzari, where I spoke about this. The downfall of the Nasi led to the destruction of the Jewish community. I mean, essentially, we lost that understanding that even though we're in exile, we then became a religion instead of a nation that had a leader, that had a government that came with it. Oh, Rosh Yeshiva. What about the Rosh Yeshiva? What does the Rosh Yeshiva do? When you think Rosh Yeshiva, you don't have to think of Rosh Yeshiva the way you think today, the head of a yeshiva. Rosh Yeshiva then was like the head of the Bedin, the rabbinic court. He made laws, he made decrees, he made halachot, he decided the spiritual standards of the community. Or Shoftei Israel, or the judges of the Jewish people, V'shotrehem, the police officers. What do you mean police officers? We had police officers until this last generation, Jewish police. In Morocco, for example, the rabbis write that on the last days of Pesach, they would go to the orchards. The whole Jewish community would go sit, each family underneath an apple tree, an orange tree, and they would have lunch together after Tefillah of that last day of Chag. And then they would all stand up, and they would say the blessing on the fruit trees. And that's where they would spend the whole Shabbat afternoon. And the chief rabbi would appoint shotrim, real police officers, to go around and to make sure that the young boys and girls weren't hiding in the bushes together, that nothing was going on over there that shouldn't happen. They literally went around and patrolled. We had a Jewish police force. המתמנים על מנת להדריך את העבריינים. They're appointed to correct those who have strayed from compliance. ולחוף אותם למשמעת, and to restore order to them. ולהפעיל את העונשים החוקיים and to enforce the punishments ordained by law. Let's break it down very simply. There were the spiritual leaders and the political leaders. Political leaders not in a negative way, not in a bad way. Politics becoming corrupt is a later invention in our history. David Melech Chazal was a politician, but he was not corrupt. Shlomo Melech was a politician, but he was not corrupt. Corruption and politics going together was not a problem that existed in the Jewish people. This happened later in our history. The first kind of leader, he has to be very humble, but he doesn't have a choice. I mean, his people are learning from him how to act. The second kind of leader, though, if the president is too humble, or a mayor is too humble, or the head of the Bedin is too humble, it can actually cause damage. Because who's going to enforce the law? Who's going to uphold the rules? And therefore sometimes he's not even allowed to be humble. He has to externally put on a show of I'm strict, I'm in charge, in order to keep order. There was a famous question in Israel. I'm not here to stick my head into this question because greater people than I dealt with this question. What happens if the Israeli army gives a soldier an order that he feels is immoral to upkeep? The example? Take Jews out of their houses because we're handing over this land to Arabs.
That's what happened to Gaza.
That's exactly what happened. What is an Israeli soldier supposed to do? Do you listen because you're a soldier? That's what I was ordered to do. Or do you disobey and say, I'm sorry, put me in prison, but I'm not willing to uphold these rules? What do you think?
In the U.S., you can disobey an immoral or illegal law.
And what happens to you?
Well, they probably would jail you anyway. Until things get cleared up a year or two down the road. Yeah.
What do you do? Well, tell me.
But generally people will just obey. Yeah.
What happened during the Gaza?
It's a great question. Remember when
There must have been some
German
conscious
soldiers are
objections.
arrested after the Holocaust and they say, what do you want from us? We were just following orders. We're just soldiers. What do you feel about that?
Scott.
I think you'd have to check each person's circumstances, really where their heart and mind was at. And if they were really pressured or forced into it, there's no way out of it, of course, you know.
In the religious community, there were three stances. Yeah.
I just read an article about that. All these years later, they were talking about two. One was a woman soldier at the time, and she forced her family out, even though she ended up crying her eyes out. And she regrets it today. That she said today, had she made the decision, she would have gone to military prison. She wouldn't have done it. And another soldier who absolutely wouldn't do it, and he went to military prison.
So there are three stances in the religious community. Really four, but I'll make two into one. The first was the ultra-Orthodox stance. See? That's why we don't go to the army, because they make us do things like that. Yeah, okay, that stance is childish. I'm putting it on the side. It's not for me to deal with. And the second stance was, of course you deny your command. The Israeli army is not God. God doesn't let Jews throw Jews out of houses, so you go to prison. That's what it is. You say, I will not carry out a command that goes against my faith. And this is my faith. And there was the third group, which said for two different reasons why it is that you should not disobey a command. The first, it's very simple. It's a dangerous situation to start disobeying commands in the Israeli army. You create anarchy. If one soldier feels, hey, I'm not willing to take Jews out of their houses, so I'm not going to serve, then what happens to the Jew who says, you know what, I'm not willing to protect those settlers over there because I'm a left-winger and I don't believe it, or I don't want to go help the Jews or the Kotel because I believe it's an occupation of Jews. If you begin to let soldiers say no to whatever they feel like it, you will destroy the whole army.
That's a precedent.
And then it's going to be a war, and then nobody's going to go to war, and then what did you do? You made the whole country, people are going to die left and right because you decided to be so righteous once upon a time. Meaning, it doesn't mean that what you're doing is right, but you're doing something wrong, and those who will take the blame will be those who led the army into this decision. As a soldier, you're just a soldier. Second, there are those who said, you know, there are going to be two kinds of soldiers. Those who are taking their people out of their house while they're crying, and those who are going to be cruel to the people who are taking them out of their houses. And he says, and you could say that if I step out, the person who's going to replace me is going to be happy doing what they're doing. And I'd rather be the one who's being heartbroken in doing it than be the one who's happy in doing it. I don't ever want to be in such a decision. I never would want to have to make such a decision. But we find that where there's lack of order, there's always chaos afterwards. And it doesn't mean that order is always the best thing. But sometimes the alternative is worse. In anarchy, we always think, it's so great, wonderful, we'll all govern ourselves. But what happens when someone breaks the law? What happens when someone steals from you? What happens when... I had this scary thing this week. There was a fake fire here in the canyon. I was driving my kids to school and there was a fire in the canyon. So I called 911. Turns out they were filming a movie there. And these guys had smoke machines making fire come out of Rose Canyon. And they actually didn't alert emergency authorities before they made the movie. They just told the park rangers. They got a permit from the park rangers, but the park rangers never passed the message up to the emergency services. So when I tried calling 911, 7 times from 2 different phones I tried calling 911. And it was a busy signal.
Oh my
Get through,
goodness.
Couldn't get through to 911. 911's phone lines went down because of the amount of phone calls they got over a fake forest fire.
Wow.
In those 10 minutes that I was trying to call 911, what if someone had a heart attack? Someone actually needed to go to the hospital? It was a crazy thing. Why am I mentioning them to you? Because at that moment, it went through my mind, what happens if you can't get through to 911?
It does happen.
What if you see someone trying to kill someone else, you try to call the police and there's just no answer? There are many places in the world there is no such thing as 911. You see injustice happening day in and day out and there's no one to call. It's just, you be quiet and hide in the shadows because it's safer for you in the shadows than it is over there. Those are corrupt countries, corrupt societies, because there is no order. Who gave the police officer a right to throw someone on the ground and put handcuffs on him? Who gave him the right? We gave him the right. It's not always nice, it's not always right. Sometimes there's aggressive force, sometimes there's police brutality, sometimes there is. The alternative, though, is more dangerous. And that's what the Rambam is saying. There's 2 different kinds of leaders. If you would come to the synagogue and you were talking during tefillah, and the rabbi takes you, throws you on the ground, puts handcuffs on you, you'd probably leave the synagogue, right? Because it's a different kind of leadership. It's not the same place. This is what the Rambam is trying to say. Uvechen, I'll read one piece of the Rambam and we'll go into Shulchan Aruch. Uvechen, hamutal al-menahel min hasug rishon, the first kind of leader, dahainu hamanhig b'darchei chasidut, he who guides people in levels of piety. הוא שיתנהג עם האנשים שהוא מנהיגם במידת הענווה החיצונית כדי שיהיה להם למופת. He should guide them in piety so they will learn proper behavior. וילכו בדרכיו, and they'll follow in his way על ידי שלומדים ממנו ומתדמים אליו. Because they want to be like him, they want to compare themselves to him. כי הוא מלמדם דרך השם, he's teaching them the way of Hashem, ומוליכם בה לבטח, and he's guiding them in a tranquil path of Hashem. ולכן הייתה ענווה מידתם של נביאי ישראל. Therefore you'll find the prophets were humble people. עם בני הנביאים המונהגים על ידם. Even though they had students, the prophets had students. They're called the bnei hanevim, the children of the prophets. They're not really children, they're students. Like, how do you say yeshiva student in Hebrew? Ben yeshiva, bnei yeshivot. Why? He's a child of the yeshiva. Even though he has parents, his real home is here. כדרך שראינו את מנהג אלישע עם בני הנביאים בלכתו עמם לירדן לכרות עצים, like we find with Elisha and his students on the Jordan River chopping wood. וכמו שיש שמואל הרמתי עומד על להקת הנביאים, and like Shmuel, they read Haramasi, Haramati, stood over the group of prophets while they were prophesying. These were prophets that got involved in their students' education. Because here, ego was not the thing. It wasn't pride. It wasn't I'm a leader. It was I'm here to help you make it. And you find that even though they were so great as leaders, they were there to help people on the spiritual path, and they were not afraid of getting their hands dirty. Vila menahel ben hasug hashani, and 180, the other kind of leader, mechayvehu hatzorech lema shebara masoret befirush hapasuk som tasim alecha melech. He must adhere to our tradition, which says in the Torah, put a king over you. Sheteh mato alecha, over you, meaning his awe should be over you. V'lachen amar David Michal, this is what King David tells his wife, Michal. Who's Michal? She's the daughter of Shaul. V'im ha'amahot asher amart imam ikaveda, v'zoi stia min הענווה החיצונית, סטייה נובעת מן החיצות. He tells them, and they will be honored by the maidservants of whom he spoke, meaning they should honor me. That's not a thing that a humble person should say. But he is saying this as a king. He's allowed to. He's expecting that other people should respect him. It's a deviation which is necessary. But it's only if inside he is really humble. He can't internally also be arrogant. Like it says in the Chumash, that his heart shouldn't be haughtier than his brothers. Chumash Eben said David, like you find David HaMelech actually says about himself in Tehillim, that my heart is empty inside of me. And even though outwardly he had to put on the show that I'm the king and everyone should respect me, internally he didn't walk around like that. David HaMelech says that he's a tolat v'lo ish, he's a worm, he's not even a person, he says about himself. That's how he felt about himself, but externally, he walked the walk of a king, he talked like a king, he sat like a king. But the only reason he was able to do that was one, because he needed to, that's how a leader must lead, and two, because it wasn't real. In the inside, he was a humble person. And that's the two different kinds of leaders that B'ezrat Hashem we'll talk more about tomorrow.